Let's speak the truth most men avoid. You can't force a woman to want you, but you can make her fear losing you. When a man knows his value, when he stops overgiving and over-explaining, something powerful happens, a shift. She starts noticing the silence. She starts questioning the distance. And suddenly she's chasing what she once took for granted. One of the most common yet unnoticed mistakes men make in relationships, especially in the early stages, is emotional overinvestment. It often starts from a place of sincerity. A man meets a woman he genuinely admires. He's captivated by her beauty, her vibe, the way she carries herself. And without realizing it, he begins to pour himself into her emotionally, thinking that's what she'll appreciate. He texts first every morning. He compliments excessively. He makes time, plans surprises, listens deeply to every detail she shares. He starts imagining a future with her before she has even decided if she wants a present with him. But here's what's happening in the background. She feels it, the intensity, the availability, the emotional hunger. And slowly, not because she's ungrateful, but because of basic human psychology, she begins to pull back. Why? Because the more emotionally available you become before she's emotionally invested, the less tension exists in the dynamic. That spark, that mystery, that subtle imbalance that keeps attraction alive, it disappears. You've handed over your energy before she asked for it. You've made yourself emotionally cheap, and what is cheap is rarely valued. Women are not drawn to men who hand over their hearts without discernment. They are drawn to depth, to strength, to restraint. When you overinvest emotionally, what you're really communicating is, my emotional world depends on you. My happiness is tied to your response. My confidence is now anchored in how much attention you give me. And whether she says it or not, she feels the pressure of that emotional weight. And that pressure is not attractive. It's suffocating. Overinvesting emotionally also creates an unfair imbalance where she hasn't even earned the emotional access you're granting her. Think of it this way. Would you give someone the keys to your house if they only visited your porch once? No, but emotionally, many men do exactly that. They open the gates too soon, not realizing that true intimacy is something that should be built gradually, reciprocally, and with balance. When she hasn't emotionally invested, your intensity feels like noise. It doesn't inspire closeness. It triggers emotional withdrawal. She starts replying later, showing less interest, becoming vague. And you, because you're already emotionally committed, begin to panic. You chase harder. You overthink. You start doing more, hoping to fix it. But what most men fail to realize is the doing is the problem. She doesn't want more action. She wants more self-control, more self-respect, more balance. The more emotionally you invest without her earning it, the more she questions your self-worth. And this is where everything begins to shift, not in your favor. It's not about playing games or pretending not to care. It's about not betraying your own emotional center. A masculine man doesn't offer his heart to someone who hasn't shown she can hold it. He observes, he assesses, he gives, but with boundaries. He connects, but without surrendering his power. And most importantly, he allows space, emotional space, space for her to initiate, space for her to wonder, space for her to reciprocate. Because when you create emotional space, you give her a chance to choose you, not just receive you. When a man stops overinvesting emotionally, he reclaims his position as the emotional leader. He becomes less reactive, more composed. He stops seeking validation through her responses. And as a result, she starts noticing, she starts thinking, she starts feeling his absence in a way that sparks her own curiosity. Because emotional balance is not created through intensity, it's created through healthy tension, that quiet strength, that calm presence, that knowing that you are whole with or without her. There's a quiet power in detachment that most men underestimate. Especially in the early stages of a connection, men tend to believe that the more open, expressive, and emotionally transparent they are, the stronger the bond will become. They believe that if they reveal everything, every thought, every plan, every feeling, they're building trust. But in reality, what they're often doing is dissolving the very mystery that keeps a woman intrigued. And when the mystery dies, so does the excitement, so does the pull. Women are not drawn to predictable energy. They're drawn to what they don't fully understand yet, what feels just a little bit out of reach, not because they love confusion, but because mystery invites curiosity. Curiosity leads to pursuit, and pursuit fuels attraction. A man who reveals everything about himself too soon doesn't create a connection. He creates familiarity. And familiarity, before desire has rooted itself, leads to emotional boredom. Detachment is not the absence of emotion. It's the refusal to let those emotions control your behavior. It's the calm discipline of knowing that you don't need to prove yourself. You don't need to over-explain your silence. You don't need to post, text, call, or chase just to be noticed. When you detach, you create space. And that space, when held with quiet confidence, is where a woman's mind begins to wander. She begins to notice your absence. She begins to question your emotional state. She begins to wonder if you've pulled away because you're reevaluating her importance in your life. And that wondering is where the emotional investment begins. The man who creates mystery through detachment doesn't need to withhold affection out of spite. He simply values his presence too much to offer it constantly. He's not cold, he's selective. He's not absent, he's intentional. When he disappears into his own world, his own goals, his own life, she feels it. And that feeling often carries more weight than any romantic words he could have sent, because energy doesn't lie. If your energy is always leaning forward, always checking in, always showing up, always giving, there's no room for her to feel your absence. And if she never feels your absence, she never truly values your presence. You see, the balance of masculine energy is in restraint, in stillness, in the art of doing less, not more, not to manipulate, but to self-preserve. Because what many men fail to understand is that attention, when given in excess, loses its value. But attention that is earned, that is rare, that is unpredictable, becomes addictive. Women are emotional creatures. They connect through feeling, through vibration, through energetic tension. So when you give her all the answers before she asks the questions, you rob her of the experience of discovery. Mystery doesn't mean becoming a ghost. It means staying grounded in your purpose, even when she tries to pull your focus. It means speaking with intent rather than impulse. It means knowing when to show up fully and when to pull back just enough for her to notice the shift in energy. She should be thinking, what's he up to? Not because you're hiding something, but because you're not available for constant validation. When you master detachment, you become emotionally unpredictable. And unpredictability, when combined with strength and presence, creates magnetism. It's what keeps her checking her phone. It's what keeps her wondering what you're thinking. It's what turns ordinary attraction into obsession. But only if the detachment is real, not performed, not forced, but genuinely rooted in your own emotional discipline. Because the truth is, the man who doesn't need constant reassurance becomes the one she constantly thinks about. The mystery isn't in the things you say, it's in the things you don't, the questions you leave unanswered, the pauses between your presence, the unspoken energy that makes her chase the parts of you she hasn't yet figured out. There's something profoundly attractive about a man who moves like his life is already full, a man who wakes up with purpose, spends his day in motion, and goes to sleep fulfilled, not because someone validated him, but because he validated himself through action, growth, and vision. In a world where emotional dependence is mistaken for love, the rare man who builds his identity outside of a woman becomes magnetic, not just to her, but to everyone around him. When you show that you have a life without her, you're not sending the message that she isn't important. You're showing her that you are not available to be consumed, that you are not waiting in emotional limbo for her attention, her text, her approval. You are not living in pause mode. You are not making her your center, because the moment you revolve around a woman, she stops rotating around you. And this is where most men lose their power. They make her the sun and they orbit her. They cancel plans, they ignore personal goals, they sacrifice routines, they become too available, too ready, too empty of self. A man who has a life doesn't need to explain it. It's in his energy. It's in his calm detachment. It's in the fact that he doesn't rush to respond because he's busy with something meaningful. It's in how he mentions his passions, not to impress her, but because they are a real part of who he is. When a man has a life, he doesn't wait for someone to give him permission to live. He lives loudly, boldly, and she sees it. She senses the momentum, the confidence that comes from being self-anchored. The truth is, women test, sometimes unconsciously. She'll test to see if you'll drop everything for her. She'll test to see if your world revolves around her presence. She'll test if your identity dissolves when she pulls back. And in those moments, if she senses that your happiness depends on her response, she withdraws, not out of cruelty, but out of instinct, because feminine energy wants to feel safe in masculine strength. And a man who abandons his own life just to keep her close doesn't feel safe. He feels unstable. He feels needy. He becomes emotionally dependent on her emotional weather. When you show that you have a life without her, you give her a chance to enter your world, not become it. That difference is everything. You allow her to see your discipline, your social circle, your commitment to fitness, your hunger for growth. She begins to witness you in your element when you're not focused on her. And ironically, that's when she becomes most attracted, because the man who has things going for him doesn't need to convince her of his worth. His life shows it. His daily habits reflect it. His focus, his movement, his glow, all of it communicates silently. I am enough, with or without your validation. Many men think that showing deep affection means prioritizing her above all else. But a woman doesn't want to be your purpose. She wants to join a man who already has one. Your job is to build a life so rich, so full, so self-sufficient that she feels inspired, not responsible for your happiness. Because the moment she feels responsible, she feels burdened. And the moment she feels burdened, she starts backing away emotionally. A man with a life doesn't announce his worth. He lives in a way that makes people feel it. He doesn't post fake status symbols. He's not trying to impress. He's just in motion. He's focused on becoming better every day for himself. And when a woman sees that, she doesn't feel like she's needed to complete you. She feels lucky to be invited into your space. And that subtle shift in dynamic changes everything. It removes pressure. It creates desire. It builds long-term attraction, not through force, but through freedom. There's a kind of silent strength in a man who knows exactly where his emotional boundaries lie and never apologizes for them. Not because he's distant or cold, but because he understands the cost of self-abandonment. Emotional boundaries are not walls built to keep people out. They are doors with locks that ensure only those who deserve access are allowed in. A man without boundaries is not open-hearted. He is exposed. And when you're exposed, you're vulnerable to being emotionally manipulated, drained, or taken for granted. Setting emotional boundaries begins with understanding your own emotional landscape. What do you allow? What do you tolerate? What are your deal breakers? Not just in relationships, but in emotional interactions. Most men never pause to ask themselves these questions. So when a woman starts behaving in ways that cross emotional lines, being disrespectful, hot and cold, inconsistent, or playing mind games, they respond with confusion, not clarity. They overcompensate, trying to fix the discomfort instead of confronting it. They bend, they compromise, and they stay silent because they don't want to lose her. But here's the reality. You're not avoiding loss. You're delaying self-respect. A woman cannot respect a man who constantly adjusts himself just to keep her comfortable. The moment she realizes that she can cross your boundaries without consequence is the moment she subconsciously loses trust in your strength. And no matter how much she claims to love you, she will test you even more. Not to hurt you, but to see if you'll finally show up for yourself. Because deep down, every woman wants a man who can lead emotionally, not control her, but anchor himself. And that starts with unwavering boundaries. Boundaries are not just what you say, they are what you enforce. It's easy to say, I don't tolerate disrespect. But when she speaks to you with sarcasm, belittles you in front of others, or gives you the silent treatment for days, do you confront it, or do you accept it in silence, afraid to push her away? That silence is not strength, it's self-erasure. And over time, it conditions her to believe that your words mean nothing, that your standards are flexible, that your emotions are available for negotiation. And slowly she stops taking you seriously, not because she doesn't care, but because you taught her that you don't. To set boundaries, you must first be willing to risk discomfort. You must be okay with the idea that someone might walk away when you say, this doesn't work for me. That's not a loss. It's a filter. When a woman truly values you, boundaries don't push her away. They pull her closer because she feels safe in your emotional clarity. She knows where she stands. She understands what you will and won't tolerate. And that certainty, that emotional consistency becomes deeply attractive. Setting boundaries also means not trying to explain or justify them too much. A man who over-explains is seeking permission. A man who calmly states his limits and stands by them, even if it means walking away, commands respect. Not through fear, but through presence. And presence is felt most when you're willing to enforce silence over chaos, distance over disrespect, peace over attachment. You must also recognize that boundaries are not just for others. They are for yourself. They are reminders of your own worth. When you ignore red flags, accept inconsistent behavior, and tolerate emotional chaos, you're not being patient. You're betraying yourself. Every time you allow someone to cross a boundary unchecked, you teach yourself that your peace is negotiable, that your emotional safety is a luxury, not a priority. And that message sinks deep into your subconscious, shaping how you show up, not just in relationships, but in every part of your life. Boundaries, when truly embodied, are not loud. They're not aggressive. They are calm, consistent, and deeply felt. You don't need to repeat yourself 10 times. You don't need to argue. You show her your standards once, and if she crosses them, you respond, not with emotional outbursts, but with decisive action. And that action becomes your language. It becomes your self-respect made visible. Distance, when used with awareness, becomes one of the most powerful emotional tools a man can embody, not to manipulate, but to reveal. Because in relationships, especially those where confusion or imbalance exists, sometimes words no longer have the impact they once did. Sometimes clarity doesn't come from long conversations or emotional explanations. Sometimes it comes from silence, not the silence that punishes, but the silence that reflects. When a woman doesn't hear from you, when she no longer feels your energy so readily available, when the emotional attention she once took for granted is no longer present, something begins to shift within her. She starts to feel the weight of your absence. And in that space, she begins to truly assess what you meant to her. But there's a difference between using distance to reflect and using distance to retaliate. One comes from grounded maturity, the other comes from ego. When you use distance as a mirror, you're not disappearing to cause anxiety. You're stepping back because something in the dynamic requires recalibration. You're noticing that your presence is no longer being honored. And instead of arguing or pleading to be seen, you simply remove yourself, not to disappear forever, but to observe. Because true detachment isn't about punishing her for not choosing you the way you wanted. It's about choosing yourself, especially when it's clear she's no longer matching your energy. Men often confuse constant presence with loyalty. They believe that being available at all times will somehow make her realize their value. But what many fail to understand is that when your energy becomes a constant, unearned certainty in her life, she loses the ability to appreciate it. What was once a gift becomes background noise. She stops responding to your messages with the same warmth. She stops initiating. She grows used to your emotional presence, not because she doesn't care, but because she never had to fear losing it. And without the fear of loss, there can be no true realization of value. That's where distance plays its role. It creates the emotional contrast. It allows her to feel the absence of what she had. It gives her the space to hear her own thoughts without your constant input. And in that stillness, the truth begins to surface. If she truly cared, if there was a genuine connection, she will feel that distance. She'll notice that the emotional environment has changed, and she'll reflect on her part in it. But if she doesn't notice, if your absence creates no ripple in her world, that too is your answer, and a painful but necessary one. Using distance as a mirror is also a way to ground yourself. It helps you step out of the emotional fog and return to your own center. When you're too close to someone, especially someone you have deep feelings for, your judgment becomes clouded. You overlook red flags. You rationalize inconsistent behavior. You start to chase potential instead of reality. But the moment you step back, not in anger, but in clarity, you begin to see the truth more clearly. You realize what was real and what was just emotional illusion. You begin to differentiate between chemistry and compatibility, between attention and affection, between presence and partnership. It's also important to recognize that distance is not only a test for her, it's a mirror for you. It reveals your own emotional needs, your triggers, your patterns. When you pull back and feel the urge to run back to her just because you feel lonely or anxious, that's your inner child speaking. That's the part of you that still thinks love has to be earned through effort. But if you can hold your ground in that space, if you can sit in the discomfort of your own absence from her life without rushing to fill it again, that's when your emotional strength is forged. That's when you begin to master the art of non-reactivity. And from that space, you stop needing her validation because you're no longer chasing closeness. You're embodying clarity. There's a fundamental difference between a man who says he's the prize and a man who moves like he is. One is rooted in words, the other in energy. One seeks to convince others, the other doesn't need to. Because when you truly embody the identity of the prize, it becomes unspoken. It shows in how you walk, how you speak, how you react, or more importantly, how you don't react. It becomes a quiet confidence that doesn't scream, doesn't chase, doesn't beg, and doesn't explain. It simply is. And people feel it before you ever say a word. Most men were conditioned to believe that their value only exists in how much they do for a woman, how quickly they respond, how many compliments they give, how available they make themselves. They were taught to prove, perform, and please their way into being chosen. But the moment you start proving your worth to someone who hasn't earned your energy, you disqualify yourself as the prize. Because the prize doesn't compete. The prize doesn't beg for attention. The prize doesn't try to win validation from someone who hasn't shown up with matching effort. The prize knows that anyone who doesn't see the value is simply not qualified to possess it. To truly embody the prize, you must first cultivate a life that reflects it. That means your mind, your body, your finances, your emotional discipline, everything about your daily existence must scream self-respect. You become the prize by the way you carry yourself, even when no one is watching, by the way you speak to yourself in private, by the way you hold yourself to your own standards. It's not about being perfect. It's about being intentional. You don't need external praise to feel powerful. You don't need a relationship to feel complete. Your wholeness is not determined by who chooses you. It's rooted in the fact that you have already chosen yourself.